Heavenly Father, we ask that you would guide us, you would direct us, that we would hear from you. And Lord, I ask that you would speak through me and that I would speak the words that you would want me to speak. And I pray that you would help me to communicate this information clearly and that it would be honoring to you. And I pray that it will touch the hearts of the people that are here, that it will inform them, and that it would be helpful to all of us as we go through this study this morning. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. We thank you for this time together and these dear friends. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I've entitled my presentation for this morning, The Last Evil Empire. The Last Evil Empire. And to be honest with you, I have a lot of ground that I intend to cover. And those of you who know that I tend to be long-winded can appreciate that. There's a lot of ground that I want to cover, and so I'm going to be moving quickly. I'm going to be making some assumptions that many of you who are here, I would say the majority of you who are here, have either a very firm grasp on biblical prophecy or at least some degree of understanding of biblical prophecy and some of the key texts within particularly the book of Revelation and some within the book of Daniel. And so I'm going to be making some assumptions as we go through that you have some familiarity with some of these texts. If you don't, I don't want to lose you. But I encourage you to listen as we go, to process. We're not going to be giving you dotting every I and crossing every T as we go through some of these texts. And we're going to be visiting a lot of different texts. But I do hope that if it's not fully understandable to you at this session, that it will challenge you to go back with a framework and to be able to dig in more deeply into the specific chapters and passages of the Bible that we're going to be discussing here in this session. I debated how I wanted to begin, whether I just wanted to jump in to where I want to go, or to give you a little bit more of an introduction as it relates to the book of Revelation, and specifically to the symbology that is clearly evident within the book of Revelation. For instance, when we go to Revelation chapter 12, we read about a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And then we read further, there appeared another wonder in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. For those of us living at this period of human history, these images can feel daunting to us when we read them. They feel like a little bit of sci-fi and fantastical, and it is hard for, I think, a lot of God's people to kind of wrap our minds around these images that are so prevalent throughout the book of Revelation, and for that matter in the book of Daniel as well. Don't throw stones at me. Don't call me a heretic. And please understand what I am saying. You must understand the context in which, for instance, the book of Revelation was penned. John is on the Isle of Patmos. It's a penal colony. He is imprisoned there, and he gets this apocalyptic vision from the Lord, and he writes it down. He pens it for us. It's an unveiling of Jesus Christ at the end of the age and what he will do. But there are symbols that are used, and I want to just briefly touch on the fact that the symbols that are used throughout the text are there for a specific purpose, and I believe that purpose is linked inseparably to the audience that this book was specifically and initially written to, although we benefit from it through the ages and to today. But it was written to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. The Isle of Patmos was just off the coast of what is today modern-day Turkey, the western coast of Turkey. Those 7 churches of Asia Minor were located on the western coastline of what is today Turkey. And they were steeped in Greco-Roman mythology. To us, it's a foreign concept. But to those who were living at that time, whether they were believers in those churches or not, Greco-Roman mythology played a very significant role in the everyday life of the people who existed at that time. So, for instance, when you read in Revelation 12, there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. I am not saying that the text here is an exact parallel to Greek and Roman mythology. But what I am saying is that I believe that John used, under divine inspiration, things that were familiar to his audience that would help them to understand the vital truths about the prophetic aspect of his message for the future. And using the familiar, listen, Jesus did the same thing when he taught. He used familiar parables. He threw alongside a parable to illustrate a spiritual truth, something that was familiar to the people of his time that they would have understood, and then overlaying it with biblical truth. So I am not in any sense saying that the book of Revelation or Daniel is built on Greco-Roman mythology. So please make sure that you don't misquote me on that you make sure that you understand. But what I am saying is, as an example, and don't get lost in this, I just making the point about the symbols or some of the symbology that's used in the book of Revelation and in Daniel. You have a woman clothed with the sun. In the mythology of the day, there were many goddesses that were worshipped. As a matter of fact, right across from the Isle of Patmos was the city of Ephesus. And Ephesus were worshipers of the goddess Artemis. And there were other deities as well. So the concept of goddess worship was very significant, and they had images and symbols of these goddesses that they worshiped. Now, in the case here, John is making a clear point of using this illustration as a reference to Israel. That this woman, Israel, would give birth to the promised one, the promised seed from Genesis chapter 3. That's the biblical truth that's there. But to the people of that day, they understood all kinds of goddesses, and they were familiar with the concept and the symbology of that. So I would suggest to you that maybe the woman that was in view was Alcmene. Alcmene was the earthly mother of Hercules. You ever heard of Hercules? Heracles in Greek, Hercules in Rome. And Hercules was a demigod. He was part, what they would say, divine, and part human. Father Zeus, mother Alcmene. And you know there was a curse from Zeus's wife Hera put on Alcmene in mythology, so that Alcmene would struggle to give birth to Hercules. And you know, in the text here, it says this woman was clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet. You know what Alcmene means? Power of the moon in Greek and Roman mythology. And here you have this woman, she's clothed with the sun and the moon is under her feet. And she struggled in the mythology to give birth. And you know what we read here? Is this woman, which is representative or symbolic of Israel, is struggling in her history because of the persecution of Satan to give birth to this promised seed who would come into the world. Do you know that Alcmene was, as I mentioned, the mother of Hercules? And you know what one of the major tasks of Hercules was in the mythology? It was to defeat the Hydra. The Hydra. How many of you have ever heard of the Hydra? Raise your hand. The Hydra was a multi-headed creature or dragon or beast. And you know what was unique about the Hydra? Is that when you killed or cut off one of its heads, 2 more grew back. Do you know in Revelation chapter 10, a couple chapters earlier, there's a depiction that we're given by John of a mighty angel. And you know that mighty angel is said to be standing with 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land. And it says he has legs as pillars of fire and his face shone as it were the sun. And later in the passage it says, and he reached up to heaven, the Colossus of Rhodes. If you're familiar with the island of Rhodes in the Mediterranean, not very far from the Isle of Patmos, there was a massive colossus that stood 185 feet tall at the entrance to the port of the island of Rhodes. And you know what that colossus was a depiction of? Helios, the sun god. So what you have is John, under divine inspiration of God, using familiar things of the day in the Greco-Roman mythology and overlaying those things, not saying that they had any truth or reality, but overlaying them to help people visualize and understand the biblical truths that he was presenting, that God was giving to him for the future, to help them grasp it. And so it's important that if we're looking at these things, and as we look at them, that we understand the context of which they were delivered and given. Now, of course, in terms of the parallel, we know that Jesus Christ was the God-man. Divine Father, human mother, Mary. We also know that Jesus Christ is coming in the book of Revelation to defeat Satan and to defeat the beast. And you know also in the book of Revelation, in terms of the beast that we're going to be reading about, that beast has multiple heads, just like the Hydra in Greco-Roman mythology. And do you know that one of the heads on the beast is going to reemerge after it died in ancient history, and it will reemerge as an eighth head on the beast, just as the Greco-Roman mythological creature, the Hydra. So what is important for you to grasp as we move on is not to get lost in all of those details, but to understand that when we're talking about beasts and heads and horns, that you don't glaze over because it's so unfamiliar to us. To understand that it was intended for the people at that time to overlay biblical truths in a way that they could visualize and they could understand it. So now we're going to move forward to Revelation chapter 13. A beast with 10 horns and 10 crowns. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, except to say in the previous chapter, Satan was introduced to us in a visual symbolic depiction as a great red dragon. And that great red dragon had 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. Now, why is Satan, and it tells us specifically in the text, why is he depicted as a great red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns? Because they are all symbolic of his work, his ideology, his strategy throughout human history. So he's depicted in a way that helps us to understand, if we can discern the mysterious aspect of what those symbols represent, he's depicted in a way that gives us great insight into his purpose and what he is doing throughout human history. So now we've been introduced to Satan in Revelation 12 as the great red dragon with the 7 heads and the 10 horns and the 7 crowns. But now we're introduced in Revelation 13 to another individual, or another creature, if you will, and that is Satan's spawn, Satan's progeny, the Antichrist. Look at Revelation 13, verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the text goes on, and Lord willing, we will come back full circle to this specific passage and see if we can make a little bit more sense of it after learning some of the other things that we're going to be sharing with you as we move along. So I want to move you, and I told you we're going to move quickly now, to Revelation chapter 17. So if you have your Bibles or your devices, turn over to Revelation 17. Revelation 17 is describing for us a picture or a scene, again, symbolic. And it is a picture of a harlot decked out in gold and scarlet and precious stones, and she's riding on the back of a beast. And that beast is full of the names of blasphemy, and it has 7 heads and 10 horns. So this woman, this harlot, representative of mystery, Babylon the Great, is riding on this beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Our focus today is not on the woman, the rider, but on the beast itself. And so we're going further in the description, and verse 7, John says, "The angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns." So John is amazed when he sees this scene of this woman riding this beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns. And he's asking the question, how can I understand this? Verse 8, "The beast that thou sawest," John is told, "was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition," or to judgment. "And those that are dwelling on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast," here it is, again, "that was and is currently not, and yet is." We'll come back. Verse 9, "And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains." In the Bible, mountains are interchangeable with kingdoms. Okay? So the 7 heads are 7 kingdoms on which the woman sits. Now listen, verse 10. "And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen." Did you see the text there? 7 kings, 5 are, at the time that John is receiving this, 5 are fallen. And 1, present tense, is. And the other is not yet come, and when he comes, he must continue for a short space. So, what this is describing, ladies and gentlemen, and again, I can't get into all of the details of it except to give you the basic framework here, because we're going to be moving on to other passages. What this is describing is the course of Gentile world powers that were the historic persecutors of Israel. And the reason that they are depicted as 7 heads on this beast is because these empires are essentially empowered by Satan. We saw in an earlier chapter that he's depicted with 7 heads. So the point is that this beast that is essentially the offspring, if you will, of Satan himself on the earth, that this beast is depicting 7 empires throughout human history that were the historic persecutors of God's people, the Jewish people. So let's take a look at the identity of these 7 and then an 8th that will come. First of all, you have Egypt. Egypt. Secondly, Assyria. Third, Babylon. Fourth, Medo-Persia. Fifth, Greece. Now, I pause there for a moment. Look back at the text, verse 10 of Revelation 17. "And there are 7 kings or empires. 5 are fallen." So at the time that John is writing this, he is living during a specific empire. Which empire is he currently living in? Rome, which is the 6th. The first 5, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, have fallen. They've come and gone in sequence. And now, what John has told is there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is Rome, and the other is not yet come. Scholars have debated, good people, and probably there are many persuasions in the audience of this size, of what that next 7th empire is. I lean strongly towards that it is the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Islamic Empire. Now, this is a much bigger discussion than we have time for today. What I would suggest to you is that all of these empires is, for instance, Egypt rose into the ascendancy. And as Egypt was in its descendancy, another empire came up and took over where Egypt left off. Conquered, took over, became in the ascendant. and so on throughout all of these empires. So now when you get to, so Egypt was taken over essentially by Assyria, and then Babylon came into power, and then Medo-Persia, and then Greece, and then Rome. Rome moved its administrative capital from what we know as Rome, Italy, to Constantinople, which is today modern-day Istanbul. And it morphed into essentially the Byzantine Empire. And the Byzantine Empire, which was really an extension of the Roman Empire, was eventually conquered at Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks. And then the Ottomans ruled, so I believe the consecutive nature and the continuity of these empires, that the Ottoman Empire would make sense as the one that follows Rome in natural sequence and progression. And then I think it's important to note that the Ottoman Empire went from approximately 1517 to 1917, which is really came to an end in connection to the First World War. And then shortly thereafter, you had the Second World War, you have the Holocaust. There is a major time of upheaval in the world and transition in the world. And shortly thereafter, as a result of all those events, what took place? Israel, God gathers them back, and miraculously, after 2,000 years, puts them back in their ancient homeland, reestablishes them. So I believe that these first 7 empires, there is a natural, sequential, chronological progression that they have. And then the world is essentially upended in very large measure, and those events were precipitated. Israel coming back into the land in 1948, and now you have an entirely new dynamic, because now you have God's covenant people who've been out of the land for 2,000 years now back in the land. And so this is a significant change in terms of God's hand and movement in the events, and I think that's an indication that we are getting very close to the end of the age. So now, when we continue on in verse 11 of Revelation 17, and the beast that was in the past, time of John's writing, and is not now, meaning Rome, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition, or to judgment. Now, there have been many who speculate, and I am not going to battle with you if you held a different position. I'm going to share what I believe I'm seeing in the text. And that is the word 7 in verse 11. And the beast that was, and I'm taking the perspective that this is the time that John was living, that he's writing these things. And that's very important to determine this, the outcome of this. And the beast that was, one before John's time, and is not at the time of John during the Roman Empire, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7. Now, if you read it, he is of the 7th, which I don't find in the text, then you'd say, there's an 8th one that's coming, and he must be a re-emerging empire from the 7th, which would mean it's a re-emergence of the Ottoman Empire. If that's what you hold to, and there are many good and godly people who do hold to that position, that you have a 7th empire, and that there is a re-emergence or revived empire that comes out of that forms the 8th empire, I'll still love you. I hope you love me. But the way I see it is that this beast, this 8th one, it was in the past before John. It's not at the time of John and the Romans, and is of the 7, not the 7th necessarily, which would mean that it must, in my estimation, come from an earlier empire prior to the Romans. That's my position. You can disagree. That's okay. So, what I would say for the 8th is I would, for this point in our discussion, call it the empire of the Antichrist. Because in verse 12 it says, the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These shall have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So there are 10 kings that are coming. They're not here at the time that John is writing this, but he's told that they will come, and these 10 will form a coalition, which will essentially form a final beast empire, or the empire of the Antichrist. Now, I want to take you back to, we're going to shift and we're going to move. Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2. So if you have your Bibles, go back to Daniel chapter 2. That's giving us the framework. The chart that you saw up there, we're going to build on that so that you're not surprised. We're going to build on that chart, but I needed to give you that framework of those first 8, just so that you have a sense of where we're headed. So those first 8 empires. Now, you'll see on the screen the chiasm, Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but it's very important that you understand this. Daniel, the book of Daniel, when he wrote the text under divine inspiration, he wrote using a specific literary style and a literary device. And that literary device is called chiasm or chiastic structure. Chiastic structure is that you have 2 mirror images of something. They're really the same piece of information or the same series of pieces of information. And they are presented separated from one another, and they are opposite of each other, but they mean essentially the same thing. It's giving you the same information, but written in different ways or presented in different ways. So what happens is a writer says, I'm going to present this information, and then I'm going to move on and present in sequence this piece of information, and then this piece of information, like a stepping up. But then he says, now I'm going to take you back down in reverse order in a chiastic structure, and I'm going to duplicate. So I started here with this piece of information, the storyline. Now I build another one, and now I build another one. And now I'm going to repeat that one at the top stair in a different style, using different language, but it's the same information. Then I'm going to step down further, and it's going to be opposite this other mirror, the second step down. And now I'm going to repeat the last story, which was my first story, in 2 different ways, presenting it in 2 ways, but they are mirror images of each other. Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 are chiastic, which means they're presenting a lot of the same information, but in 2 diverse ways, telling the story uniquely in each instance, but they are together, they are unique. And there's a second chiastic structure in the book of Daniel that starts in chapter 8, and the other chiasm is at chapter 11. So there are 2 of them. If you can picture them as steps up, down. Those 2 are the same. Then step up, down in the storytelling. Those 2 are the same. So we're focused on the first 2, which is Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. It's very important. I think it will make sense to you as we move further along. So in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, he has a dream. And his dream is of a great colossus, and Daniel is able to interpret this dream in the power of God to explain to Nebuchadnezzar what he saw in the dream and what it means. And so this great colossus is a colossus of metals, and I'm sure it's familiar to you. Daniel reveals to Nebuchadnezzar what the colossus was, the metals, and which empires they're connected to. So Daniel says, you, King Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold, the king of Babylon. So the gold head on the colossus in Nebuchadnezzar's vision in Daniel chapter 2 is Babylon. The second, chest and arms of silver, we're told are Medo-Persia. These are prophecies at the time of Daniel. Now Daniel is in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar is king. Daniel is in the court of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon at a very high position. Godly, wonderful young man, Daniel. And Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he needs somebody to interpret it for him, and Daniel, under divine inspiration, understands what the vision is, and he's revealing it to Nebuchadnezzar. And it's the course of Gentile world powers, but it is beginning with Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel says, you, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold in your vision, in the Colossus. But there's another that's coming that's inferior to you. And you can see in terms of the metals decrease in value, but they increase in strength. And so you have the head of gold, Babylon. Then you have the chest and arms of silver, Medo-Persia, an empire. Again, this empire was not on the scene yet. This is prophetic. For us, it's history. But at the time that Daniel was revealing it to Nebuchadnezzar, it's still prophetic in the near term. Medo-Persia. And then the next, the belly and thighs of brass or bronze, Greece. So now, in Daniel chapter 2, here's what the text says. It says, "The image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest," saying to Nebuchadnezzar, "till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them into pieces." Now listen. "Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth." And later in the end of verse 38, Daniel says, "You, Nebuchadnezzar, thou art this head of gold. After thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, that fourth kingdom. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken or brittle." Most commentators that you hear of or read about or read from who are interpreting this Colossus and connecting these empires to these different metals on the Colossus, when they come to the fourth, which is the legs of iron and the feet, iron and clay mixed together, they take the position that the fourth empire is Rome. And the reason that they do that is obvious from the standpoint that we know historically. You had Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, that were in consecutive order. But I am here to tell you that that is not my view. There are others who also hold to this view that Rome is not in view with Daniel's Colossus. There are many reasons. First of all, Rome does not fit all the description. Rome were builders. Rome, when they went in and took over a nation, they did not destroy utterly and completely in many instances. They built on top of what was there. They made it better. They did not, in many instances, require you to give up your religious system. They just one time a year required that you would give honor and pay tax to Caesar back in Rome. But they didn't destroy utterly. There are other reasons why I don't believe that this is Rome. And what I would suggest to you is, I don't see that there is more than one empire here in the iron legs, feet, and toes. It's an explanation, I believe, of one empire that is still to come in the future, and that is the empire of the Antichrist. This description of the fourth empire that is there, this fourth kingdom shall be strong, as iron breaketh in pieces, it subdues all things. It shall break in pieces and bruise. But it will be a kingdom divided. It will not have cohesion. It will be partly strong and partly brittle. Now, this is important to understand that when we're talking about this, first of all, you have two legs. And I would suggest to you that this may, in fact, be a reference to the two major wings of Islam. Possibly. Sunni and Shia Islam. The 10 toes are representative of 10 kings. Again, we'll connect to this back in the book of Revelation. Of 10 kings that will arise, that will unify, and they will coalesce together and give their power and authority to one individual that will rule over them. But the 10 will not necessarily all get along well with each other. I would suggest to you the possibility that what they may be forming is an Islamic caliphate, a group of nations that will form together under the religion of Islam, both economically and religiously, but they will not necessarily all adhere to each other. Some will be stronger, some will be weaker, but they will form and give their power and authority to one individual, a Khalifa, that will rule over them. I am not dogmatic on this issue, but I lean in that direction. So now that is Daniel chapter 2, but it's important to understand, how does this end? How do we know from Daniel chapter 2 that this Colossus and this final empire, this fourth empire that's coming on the world, how do we know that we're jumping to the end of the age and not in consecutive order with Babylon, Medo Persia, and Greece, which were historic empires for us? Because it tells us that there is a stone cut out of the mountain without hands, a reference to Jesus Christ, who will come and will smite the Colossus on the feet. And what does the text say? The entire Colossus will come crashing down at the same time, and it will become like the dust on the threshing floor. The wind will just drive it away. And that stone, Jesus Christ, that strikes it on the feet and brings it tumbling down, becomes a great mountain. Mountain is synonymous for kingdom. And so Jesus Christ, when he returns, will establish his kingdom literally and physically on the earth, not figuratively. Reality on the earth. So we know from the text that Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold in his time period, and another kingdom will come after you, and a third one will come after, and a fourth one will come. The stone comes, Jesus Christ, brings the whole Colossus down at the end of the age. All of the metals come down. The entire Colossus comes down at the end of the age when the stone comes, which gives you a clue about what? They're all going to be there at the end. They're all going to be there at the end. So Daniel 2, we fill in our chart, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and the empire of the Antichrist. Notice that Egypt and Assyria are not in view here. We're starting this in Babylon. The whole setting is in Babylon. So Egypt and Assyria, of the 8 total empires that we know from the book of Revelation, that will be the persecutors of Israel historically and in the future, they're all there. But we see that in Daniel chapter 2, Egypt and Assyria are not even listed. They were prior. And let me tell you something else, folks. For those who want to say that in Daniel chapter 2, that the legs and the feet and toes are Rome, there are not enough body parts on the Colossus for Rome to work. There are too many spaces or slots that the book of Revelation tells us. You'd have to have Rome and then Rome again and a revived Roman Empire. So it cannot be, in my estimation, based on my study, it cannot be Rome that's being referred to as the fourth image or the fourth empire in Daniel chapter 2. Now let's move on to Daniel chapter 7, and I must move quickly. In Daniel chapter 7, we have a parallel text as part of our chiasm that we talked about. This is in large measure, a restatement, a retelling of the mirror image back in Daniel chapter 2, but it's told in a very different way. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel now has a vision given to him by God. And he sees 4 great beasts come out of the sea. When you read out of the sea, that's out of the nations, the sea of nations. Okay? So he sees these 4 great beasts come up. The first one was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings were therefore plucked. It was lifted up from the earth, made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given unto it. And I won't get into all the details of the symbology there, but I would suggest to you strongly that this is, again, a mirror image of what we saw in Daniel chapter 2, communicating the same information or similar information in a different way, and that Babylon is now depicted in this first beast as a lion with eagle's wings. Verse 5, and behold another beast, a second like to a bear, raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth, and of it between the teeth. And they said unto it, Arise and devour much flesh. I would suggest to you that this is the Medo-Persian Empire. The bear is described actually in the text as being on one side higher than the other, which gives you the sense of the Medes and then the Persians, which were stronger and greater. The second half of that, second portion of that empire. I think it fits the description here very well. You move on to the next, which is a description of a leopard. Had 4 wings of a fowl on the leopard. Very significant. We're going to come back to that leopard in the next chapter. Very important. Greece. And remember what the leopard had? 4 wings of a fowl and 4 heads. Dominion was given unto it. Now, we get to verse 7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse, different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So you see the parallel between this final beast, and it is diverse, it is different than the ones previous to it. Great iron teeth, and it says that it had horns, the 10 horns, similar to the Colossus in Daniel chapter 2, stated in a different way. Colossus, iron, 10 toes. So you have 10 toes in Daniel 2. You have 10 horns on this final beast in Daniel chapter 7. So I would suggest to you this final beast empire revealed. I would suggest to you once again that it is not Rome, that it is moving us. And the text moves us into the time. Look, verse 9 of Daniel chapter 7. I beheld till thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. So this, again, is a reference to God ruling and judging over the affairs of men at the end of the age. So these 2 visions, the first one, Daniel chapter 2, is Nebuchadnezzar's of the Colossus. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, empire of the Antichrist, the final empire. Daniel 7, the chiastic mirror of it. The beast, the lion, Babylon. The bear, Medo-Persia. The leopard with the 4 heads and 4 wings, Greece, and the diverse beast with the iron teeth and the 10 horns. And then there's a little horn that will come out as an 11th. The empire, I would say, of the Antichrist. Mirror images of those empires. And once again, who is victorious at the end? Jesus Christ, with God the Father overseeing the affairs of what is taking place on the earth. Jesus Christ is victorious. So if we're filling out our chart, Daniel chapter 7. Once again, Egypt and Assyria are not mentioned. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and that final beast empire, empire of the Antichrist. And how do we know that? Because of the context and because of the 10 horns, which is a connection again to the 10 toes, and we'll get to those 10 horns back when we go back to the book of Revelation. Those 10 kings or nations that coalesce together to form that final beast empire. Now, Daniel chapter 8. In the very next chapter, which starts a new chiastic structure that goes from 8 to 11, you have a vision. And that vision is of a ram and a he-goat. And the ram is representative, and we're told in the text, the ram is coming from the area of Persia. It's representative of Persia. And the he-goat is Macedonia, northern Greece. And this depiction of this in this vision is the ram is pushing from the area of Persia in the east, north and to the west and to the south, pushing. And this he-goat, which is in northern Greece or Macedonia, is pushing back. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a story or an account of the Persian-Greek wars. The Persian-Greek wars. And it is Darius from Persia leading the Persian army towards Alexander the Great. in northern Greece, Macedonia. And so this ram is pushing, but then this he-goat with a notable horn, Alexander the Great, is pushing back and decimates the ram and destroys the ram. And this he-goat with this notable horn from Macedonia sweeps across the whole Middle East, conquering Persia and moving all the way to the borders of what is today modern-day India. Alexander the Great conquered much of the known world, from northern Greece all the way through what we know today as Turkey and Syria and Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan and some of the other stands. He conquered it all, and he came down to Egypt as well. But Alexander the Great, at a very young age, dies. And Alexander the Great has no heir. So his kingdom is divided up into 4. And in the text of Daniel 8, and we don't have time to analyze it this morning, but in that text, it makes clear in the vision that Daniel has and that he's revealing that this notable horn on this he-goat, Alexander, dies, and his kingdom is divided into 4. And we know historically that happened. His kingdom is divided into 4. There were 2 main important areas of his empire that were divided among his generals. One in the south, in Egypt, were the Ptolemies, and one to the north of Israel were the Seleucids. And out of the Seleucid Empire, a little horn, and the text is using symbology, a little horn in Daniel 8 arises. And that little horn rises to power out of relative obscurity. And he is a great persecutor of Israel and the Jewish people. He desecrates the temple in Jerusalem. He tries to instill all of his Greek gods and gymnasium on the Jewish people. And he kills a pig on the altar. He takes the drippings from this pig, which was an anathema to the Jewish people of the day, and he takes the drippings of the pig and he drizzles it over the sacred texts at the temple. He desecrates the temple and murders, rapes, and pillages in Jerusalem. Ladies and gentlemen, his name was Antiochus Epiphanes. He's a historical individual who lived and is well documented. The reason that he is in Daniel chapter 8, and the reason that story is there for us, and it was prophetic at the time, for us it's historical, is because Antiochus Epiphanes is a type, a shadow, an illustration of the coming Antichrist. And so it's critical for God's people to understand, I believe that the reason that this text is here is to give us and the Jewish people an understanding of what that Antichrist will be like, and very possibly where he may be coming from. So what we have in the text here thus far in Daniel 2 and 7, no mention of Egypt and Assyria. We're starting at Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and we jump to final beast empire, empire of the Antichrist, in 2 and in chapter 7. And now you get into chapter 8, and we're getting even more information about 2 empires that were fighting it out in this list, the Persians and the Greeks, in the transition from the time of Persia, the Medo-Persia, to Greece. And who were fighting in the transition? Darius, the Persian, leading the Persian armies against Alexander the Great of the Greeks. And the Greeks won out, Persian descended, Greeks in the ascendancy under Alexander the Great, and he establishes a great empire. It's divided into 4 among his generals, and out of one of the 4, a type or an illustration of the coming Antichrist arises, and his name was Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, knowing all of that, let's move back to Revelation chapter 13. Revelation 13 is giving us a description of the Antichrist empire as it is rising. And Revelation 13 starts, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea," John is saying, "and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, out of the nations, having what? 7 heads and 10 horns. Now get this. And upon his horns 10 crowns. What does it tell you about the time frame here? If you have a beast rising out of the nations, and he has 7 heads, representative of the historic empires that were the persecutors of Israel, and essentially showing that he is the progeny or spawn of Satan himself, the red dragon with the 7 heads. So we know whose guy this is. This is Satan's guy on the earth, right? The one who's rising up, and the empire that's rising. This is an empowerment of Satan, and it's clear because of the 7 heads in the description. But the heads have what? 10 horns. And it's not just that there's 10 horns there and they really aren't doing anything yet. They have 10 crowns, which means they're active, which means that these 10 are now active at the end. So, 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy against the God of the Bible. And listen, the beast which I saw, this is now general description. The beast which I saw was like unto a what? Leopard. Have we seen a leopard somewhere before? We have. And the leopard was depicting what ancient empire? Greece. So, on our chart, what we have here in Revelation 13, in a description of the Antichrist rising out of the nations, the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. Have we come across a bear before? Medo-Persia from Daniel chapter 7. And his mouth was as the mouth of a lion. Have we come across a lion before? Babylon. And the dragon, if you had any doubt, gave him his power and his seat, his throne, and great authority. He is directly empowered by Satan. Now, when I say he, this is the Antichrist. The challenge with the scriptures here is, are we talking about an individual or are we talking about an empire? And I would suggest to you that they are interchangeable. We were talking about both. We're talking about an empire, but we're also talking about the one who will rule over that empire, who will lead it. Satan gives the dragon, gave him, the Antichrist, his power and his seat. He's directly empowering him, giving him his throne and great authority. What's interesting about this, though, is that we have the same 3. You can see it on the chart. We have the same 3, but they are inverted. They are inverted. So I want to ask you a question. Which empire was the strongest of the 3? Because if you're connecting it back to Daniel chapter 2 and the Colossus of the Metals, which was the strongest? Greece was the strongest and had the most territory after Alexander the Great conquered. Which one was the weakest but the most valuable? Babylon, the head of gold. And then silver in the middle for Medo-Persia. So they are inverted. So in Revelation 13, when this beast and this empire is rising out of the nations, what does John describe it like? The exact same 3 empires from Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, but in the inverted order. Which was the last empire of Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 of these 3? Greece. Very, very significant. So let's keep looking. And I saw one of his heads in Revelation 13:3, as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast, and who's able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. He was blaspheming God, and he was making war with the saints to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. Back to verse 3. I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. Now, what did we learn in Revelation 17 in terms of the list on the far left side? What did we learn? We learned in the Revelation 17 passage that John was told at his time period where he was living, 5 of the empires are fallen: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. One is Rome, the time that you're living, John. And there's another one that's coming for a short period of time, and I would suggest to you the Ottoman Turkish Empire. And out of the 7, another one will come. The one that was here before, John is told, and is not now during the time of the Romans, and will come as the 8th. Even he is the 8th. So I would suggest to you that what the Bible is describing to us and is informing us of is the final beast empire, number 8, way over on your list. And at the bottom, that the final beast empire is one specifically that existed before the time of the Romans. And we're told here in this passage in Revelation 13, this one that's going to come, that's going to revive at the end. We're told that it's like a leopard. It's like Greece in terms of its geographical area. We're told it's like a bear. We're told that it's like a lion. And when you compare and contrast what we see here to what we saw in the book of Daniel, I would suggest to you that what we are seeing is an overlay of empires. Because remember, in the Colossus, when the stone comes, does the entire Colossus come down at the end? It does. Does the entire Colossus turn to dust and the wind drives it away and that stone becomes a great mountain, a kingdom of the Lord on the earth? Yes. So if it is a composite of those 3, because those 3 empires are repeated over and over, as we've seen. The first one is the smallest of the empires. It was Babylon. But then the Medo-Persians came, and they had a much bigger territory. But then when Alexander the Great defeated the Persians, he expanded his empire further to the south in Egypt and all the way to the borders of India. And his empire looked like that. And if we are told, and we are, that there is a beast that is going to rise out of the nations directly empowered by Satan, and that beast will have 7 heads and 10 horns, and those horns have crowns on them in Revelation 13. They are active kings who are going to give their power and authority to the one who will rule over them, Satan's man, the Antichrist. So I would suggest to you that the empire of the Antichrist, in terms of the geography of the Middle East, looks something like this. It is essentially the height of the Alexandrian Empire of Greece, the height of Greece. And if we make it all one color, here you can see the empire of Alexander the Great. Now, I am not saying that all of the exact borders are going to be the way you see depicted on this screen, but I would suggest to you these are the nations that comprise that empire at the end. And I am not dogmatic that all 10 are in there, or maybe one is excluded and there's another that should be listed. But I would suggest to you that if you're looking at it from a modern perspective, that this is what the Bible is depicting is coming at the end of the age. And we are not very far away. But there's a question mark down at the end. From Revelation 13:3, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded unto death, and his deadly wound was healed. And remember that I suggested to you that it must be one of the empires that was before Rome. So what are our options? Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. Well, we know geographically from the scriptures that Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece are all rolled into the geographic empire of the Antichrist. But specifically, can we be a little bit more specific? And I'm not dogmatic on this issue, but if I had to postulate my best guess based on the text that we have, I would suggest to you that it is Assyria. Assyria. But if you have your Bible, turn to the book of Micah. Micah chapter 5, verse 2. But thou, Bethlehem, Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth. Who is he? Who is he? Out of Bethlehem. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, that is, to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. Verse 5. And this man, who? Jesus, shall be the peace. When who? The Assyrian shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces, then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men, and they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod and the entrances thereof. Thus shall he deliver us. Jesus Christ shall deliver us from the Assyrian when he comes into our land, and when he treadeth within our borders. The other passages say the same thing in essence about the Assyrian, the coming Assyrian. And I would suggest to you that it's very possible that the location of where the Antichrist will emerge will be from the ancient land of Assyria. Who in Daniel chapter 8, as a type or a foreshadow of the coming Antichrist, was also from Assyria? Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember in Daniel chapter 8, the foreshadowing of the coming Antichrist? So I would suggest to you that it is quite possible that the Antichrist himself will come out of Assyria. And it is possible that that empire, which essentially is no longer what we see in existence today, or that we understand to be in existence today, may rise from obscurity, because the Bible tells us that when you have those 10 horns, that there's a little one, an 11th that pops up. That's the Antichrist out of obscurity. And he comes out of nowhere. And he overtakes 3. And all of them give their power and authority to that one little horn that comes up out of obscurity. And I would suggest to you it's possible that he may rise from the area of Assyria. Where is Assyria? This is the ancient area of Assyria, smack dab and solidly in the middle of the entire empire of the Antichrist. I am not dogmatic on these things. I am just going through a process of looking at the text and comparing Scripture with Scripture. I encourage you to do so on your own and to dig deeper into these things. But ladies and gentlemen, the basic premise of what we're talking about here, I think, is accurate from a biblical perspective. We may not have all the I's dotted and T's crossed, but I think this is where things are moving. We are getting so close to the end of the age, and God's people are largely asleep at the wheel. I'm not impugning you, but I'm saying in Christianity in general today, people are not paying attention to what is happening in the world, particularly in the Middle East. We are not far away, I do not believe, from these things transpiring, and they are happening right in front of our faces. All you have to do is turn on the television, do a little searching online, and you can see what is taking place in Turkey today. The wording, the verbiage that is coming out of President Erdogan of Turkey is shocking. Israel, we are coming for you. Iran, we are developing a nuclear weapon, And we're going to lay waste the city of Tel Aviv if you do anything to try to stop our nuclear program. Folks, it is happening before our very eyes. The nations in between Turkey and Iran, Iraq and Syria are weak. But I will make one point to you, and I will close with this. In northern Iraq, in the heart of where ancient Assyria was, is a group of people who live between four nations. They live in northern Iraq, they live in part of northern Iran, they live in portions of southeastern Turkey and in northern Syria. And this group of people is one of the largest groups of people without their own homeland. And they're called the Kurds. There are approximately 40 million of them living in that region. And if you look online, you will find that their economy is booming. Skyscrapers, yes, being built. Modern homes being built. And they are in search of a homeland for themselves. One of the largest people groups on earth without one. I am not saying it's the Kurds. All I'm doing is saying we need to stay apprised of what is happening right before our very eyes. And we need to be sharing these truths with our family, with our friends, with our colleagues, with our coworkers, because Jesus is coming again very soon. The wonderful thing about all of this is that despite the power that Satan will throw at this, despite what he is doing in the world to usurp what rightfully belongs to Jesus Christ, God will have none of it. And in God's proper timing, when all of this comes to fruition, that stone will come down from heaven, Jesus Christ, and he will destroy the nations. He will turn them to dust, and he will establish a kingdom on the earth for 1,000 years and beyond in the eternal state, where he will rule and reign over the earth. And he will be a Jewish king. Jesus is coming again. Bank on it.